What's up, 49ers fans? Welcome to another edition. My name is Rob Shue. A pleasure to have you here. I am joined today by a fantastic guest. He has had me over on his show on YouTube, So Real Sunil from SI Sports Illustrated, all 49ers. Sunil, how you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing fantastic, man. I feel blessed to get the opportunity to be on your show as well, man. Like I said, that setup is so sick and you look so clean, man. It makes my side like I don't even want to look at my side. I'm just totally focused on you right now, man.
Well, I appreciate that. All eyes on me. I'm like Tupac, right? That's how I want it. All eyes on me. No, I thank you so much for jumping on today. You had me on your channel, and we had a fantastic dialogue breaking down the NFC West. But, man, football has started now. We are back into the regular season. You excited, man?
Very excited, man. I've been so hyped. This is the first, obviously working with SI and then, working with you guys, doing all these streams and whatnot. It's been my most intensive off season talking about football just straight. So to actually be able to watch games now and be able to analyze games and talk about them, it's been amazing, man. And it's only been one weekend. Just from the games from this weekend, I think this is going to be one of the better seasons that I've ever been a part of as far as watching. All the teams seem very competitive. So I think, well, not all the teams, but a lot of teams seem competitive. So I think it's going to be a fun season.
Certainly those teams in the NFC West seem competitive as hell. When we broke that down on your channel, I didn't realize what we were in for. I knew that we were in for something special, but I honestly couldn't have predicted what happened in week one and how good everyone looked. I did think and continue to think that you'll have multiple playoff teams from this division and that everyone will finish pretty tight and in the double-digit win column, but it's looking a heck of a lot tighter than even I imagined.
Right. I think we all undersold Arizona, like all of us.
Yeah, that's a fact. And who knows if they can keep putting it together, right? It's overreaction week one, so you never know. They looked sharp coming out of the gate last year, and then it came off the rails a little bit for them.
Very good point.
Not saying that's going to happen this year, though, because they do look sharp, but it is early. So speaking of early, speaking of grading how people are doing so far, let's talk about our 49ers here, our week one grades. When we break it down into offense and defense, how did you feel the quarterbacks did week one up against the Detroit Lions?
Yeah, so this one is kind of interesting for me to grade because I think I'm grading on a curve just because of my expectations. But I'm going to try to keep it kind of fair because hopefully we'll be able to do this more often and, throughout the year. So I'm going to give the quarterbacks, and we're just doing 49ers, right?
Correct. Just the 49ers. Who cares about the Lions? Yeah, that's right. It's week two. The Lions are gone. We're never going to see those guys again. Maybe we'll do it with the teams that we'd come up against in the playoffs, but all credit to the Lions. I don't think that's going to be them this year.
All right, so I'm going to go with a solid B. And,
solid B.
Yeah, because I think that Jimmy Garoppolo did something a little bit different than what he usually does, and that's throw the ball a little bit farther down the field than usual.
He did, right?
Yes, and he seemed a little more mobile. He was able to evade some pressure. He threw a great, throw to Hasty with pressure in his face, got clobbered, and still was able to make a very accurate throw. Could have had 2 touchdowns if Shanahan didn't put in Trey Lance to take that one at the end zone for him. So that would have made his number line look even better. But overall, I'm going to give it a solid B. I know Swan Song just put up, it could be an A. I always want to leave room for improvement. I think that there was some balls that probably could have been, there was a couple balls here and there that, possibly could have been intercepted that just the defense didn't get their hands on. And then obviously the fumble at the beginning of the game. So I'm going to give it a B just because it's early and we don't want to give too high grades because I want to see them play better.
That's true. You want to see that improvement, and you can't start too high because then you got nowhere to go in the upper spectrums. I like that rating, and I think you called out a couple of key things. Jimmy's not wearing that knee brace, and Jimmy is moving around. Jimmy looks a little bit better when it comes to his mobility, willingness to shift around in the pocket, roll out. I find myself a little bit in between where Swan Song puts you at an A and where you had it at that B. Let's see in here. Jason and I are a bit closer. I've got it at A-, B+ if you're taking into account the Lance runs. I thought that I agree wholeheartedly. Jimmy looked really sharp, and it was not spectacular play, but he was pushing the ball down the field. Passes were on target, getting out on time. I did have to deduct some. You pointed it out. There was the one clear, should have been a pick that was dropped, but that was on a deflection, hit the receiver in the hands, and so you can't take off too much for that. But when I look at the ineffectiveness of the Trey Lance runs when he was brought in, I have to bring it down just a little bit. I would think that that is setting up plays for the future. I think that we'll see those very same runs come again and something more creative come out of it. I think when you're up against the Lions, probably you're thinking to yourself, I'm holding a little bit back. I'm keeping a little something in reserves for the big games when they come out. So I thought it was very solid. There's certainly a lot of things to be optimistic about. But I'll be looking to see improvement from week 1 to week 2, especially when they bring in Trey Lance. All right, what'd you think about the running backs? Obviously, we have to take into account the Mostert injury as a portion of that, but we will touch specifically on the Mostert injury later. So this is more about the healthy backs that came out.
Right. I'm going to give them A-. And the only reason why I'm not giving it a solid A is because I think they struggled on short yardage to be able to get like the 3rd and 1s and things like that. And I think that stuff's going to change when Trey Sermon gets added to the running back core. But I mean, there's so much. What can't you say about Elijah Mitchell's first game as a rookie to start out, to be thrown into a situation that you weren't expecting, to take pretty much 95% of the carries? I think Hasty only got like 3 or 4 opportunities to carry the ball. They didn't even run a lot of the jet sweeps that they usually do. You know, they only run a few of those. So the running game and the productivity of the running game was 95% Elijah Mitchell, and he did an amazing, amazing job. So I have to I'm giving him an A- just because I feel like goal line and then like short yardage situation, because you have to throw in. Did you say the running game or running backs? I'm sorry.
Running backs specifically.
I'm going to still give him an A- just because that short yardage, I think, can be improved. And then they move up to an A, maybe even A+ after that.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% on what you put there. I actually have an A- on my running backs grade as well. I am grading on a curve here because of the idea that we're talking about our 2nd and 3rd string running back in the game, and they were able to outperform where they are on the depth chart. I mean, Elijah Mitchell, hello, Bobby Turner. It's just, he just does it over and over and over again. Right. He finds the value in these later round picks and the restricted and the free agent signings coming out of college. It's just, and it's the grind. You got to respect it when you read up on Bobby Turner. It's not that he's some magic man who just sees this. He's a grinder. He's a guy that calls these running backs every day, that touches base with them, that researches each and every one of them. I mean, just does an incredible amount of work in the offseason preparing himself to make these selections. And I'm continually wowed by the talent that he brings in. And Elijah Mitchell, to me, is just another name in a long line of folks that Bobby Turner has found and brought into whatever organization he's been with, the Shanahans at that time. And thank goodness for it, man. It's just, you couldn't hope for anything more from a 6th round pick. You heard people talking about being surprised that Elijah was still on the board. After seeing him now, I am too. When I watched the college highlights, I tweeted out that day of the draft, I can't wait to see this in Shanahan's offense. I think I said something like, I'm going to go to sleep and dream of this in Shanahan's offense, because I saw the one cut and go, and that's exactly what I saw. I took a little bit off for Hasty, missing a couple of the blocks when we're talking about pass protection. And I do wonder, after we had to let Gallman go in order to get Hasty through to the roster and he was swooped up by the Falcons, I do wonder if we will struggle a bit in pass protection. I don't know which of the 3 backs currently on the roster is going to really be that guy that on third down you can count on to light up the blitzer as he's coming through to get to the quarterback.
I think it's going to be Sermon. He was pretty decent at it in college. And obviously he's the biggest body out of the 3 running backs. So I assume it's going to be him.
I have to think so too. And he did look good in preseason doing that, even though he is a rookie. And to be honest, I was completely floored by the fact that he was a healthy scratch week 1. I certainly anticipate that
he got into some off the field trouble.
Trouble.
Yeah, he broke him, and I actually got this from Silverado Kev. He told me that him and Aiyuk broke team rules. Ooh. And that's the reason why they Sermon was a scratch because they had more depth there. Receiver wise, they had to keep Aiyuk because he's the punt returner, and also wide receiver depth. So that's the report I got. I haven't seen the report, but somehow Silverado Kev is reporting that's the reason why these things happen.
Yeah, I can't confirm it, but I definitely believe it. You know what I mean? Shanahan is an old school type of a coach when it comes to a lot of things. And I think rules and keeping people in line when they break the rules certainly falls into that category of, accountability. Great. That to me is old school, and that fits Shanahan's mold. So it doesn't surprise me at all for that to be the fact. I think that Swan Song's seeing the same thing that I did with regard to the blitz pickup, talking about also Hasty making one good block, but did have that one bad one. So it was a great showing as far as production from the backs. However, not a fantastic one with pass protection. We shall see if Sermon takes that to the next level against the Eagles, who have a very ferocious front. We'll get to that later in the show. All right, offensive line. I'll go first on this one. I thought it was hands down the best group on the field. I was pleasantly surprised by the performance of the offensive line. I've got them rated at an A. I thought it was dominant, but I did have to ask myself, is that more of a factor of dominance by the 49ers offensive line, or did that have something to do with the lack of names along the defensive front for the Detroit Lions?
Yeah, I mean, I'm right with you. I'd give it an A. The only thing I could say to that is you play who's in front of you, right? So if you are going to play an inferior group, that's the way you want to play them. Pretty much keep your quarterback clean. Few pressures here and there. I think they got maybe 1 or 2 sacks on Jimmy Garoppolo. I'm not remembering the number offhand, but the offensive line, I tweeted it through the game. If you don't know any of their names through the game because the announcers aren't saying them, that means that they're doing a good job, right? So no penalties, not too many, no blown coverages. Alex Mack looked great. Obviously Trent Williams didn't even seem like he seems like a cheat code out there against Detroit, pancaking people and stuff like that. So this group, obviously it's week 1, obviously it's Detroit, but they definitely look better than last year, and they might even be better than 2019. So to be determined. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see this offensive line end up rating out better than the 2019 offensive line.
I mean, that's a bold statement, but I will say, to back it up, that they do seem to have figured out the one piece that they couldn't get figured out in 2019, and that's the center position, critical piece within the Shanahan offense. Alex Mack looked good. It's a call out here about not trusting Brunskill. I got to say, I actually think that Brunskill looked really good on Sunday, and I have some high hopes. I think that Aaron Banks will compete for that position, but that's a tough guy to knock off. You're talking about someone who is right there, as an average right guard within the league, and that's saying something to be one of the 32 best in the world at anything, right? And Brunskill, to me, has earned that spot, so the rookie will really have to come in and earn the position in order to take right guard away. All right, tight ends. I've also got that as a high grade for me. To me, it comes out as an A-, and it's primarily me grading Kittle. I just am amazed by him. He is a beast, a real beast. He makes catches in traffic. He's got the run after the catch and amazing run blocking. When you go back through and watch your tight end pancake fools. That's fun film review in my book. What say you, Sunil?
I give it a little bit of a lower score, and I gave it a B plus. I mean, he did, and it's more just the way he didn't get the opportunity for me to see enough balls to be able to be graded in the A level. And then one thing that I need to see from Kittle this year is being a red zone target.
Oh, goodness.
He can't just be. I mean, obviously we love him in the run blocking game. He's A plus there. But his catches were yak catches, which are great to see. But in the red zone, he needs to be a primary target, and he wasn't that, in this game. So for me, that lowers his score and maybe that's just me being biased. I need to see that from him because I don't think we really have a red zone threat, and he's never been that. And that's the next evolution to his game that I'm really looking to see out of him.
That's a great call out, and also something that I see as well as something that we have to work on for George Kittle. And I'll touch on it in the fantasy football segment when we get there, as long as we have time. But it's just the bane of his existence when it comes to the fantasy world. It's just these touchdowns are non-existent. We're not using him in the red zone, and the longer TDs are fewer and far between because of the idea that we don't push the ball as often, or at least historically have not over the last 2 seasons. I have to say that people will bring in the fumble as part of George Kittle, and I agree that's fair because it was Kittle that allowed it to go, not the fumble, but the missed onside kick. Yeah. I took that into special teams and factored that in as part of the hands team on special teams, but I think it's fair to call out that critique of Kittle because it was ugly to watch. It was a very important play. It did look a little foolish, and I'm sure that if Kittle had it to do all over again, he would rectify that and grab that, no problem. To me, it was fantastic. This is also a fair point Jason calls out with Kittle going off, but everyone else just being fairly non-existent. You saw Charlie Warner get dinged up a little bit, but thankfully came back in. So it's fair to wonder if we have considerable depth behind George Kittle, because that's a question we may have to answer at some point. All right, so going on to the wide receivers. How did you have the wide receivers grading out here for the 49ers?
Yeah, I mean, Debo, A-. Overall wide receiver core, and the only reason why he gets the minus is because of the fumble at the end of the game, right? Otherwise, it would have been a clear A+ performance. But overall receiving core, I have to give a B+ because other than Debo, there wasn't many threats, right? Sherfield obviously got the touchdown, which was great in the red zone, but then he was kind of non-existent. Sanu had maybe like 1 or 2 catches. Aiyuk obviously was in trouble, so he wasn't playing much. So it's hard to say the whole receiving core earned an A-. So overall, I'd probably give the receiving core a B+. But, Debo obviously gets an A-.
Great call out on Debo. I mean, Debo. Oh, my God. Phenomenal. He's a monster. And we'll touch on it again in the fantasy football segment, but I am glad that I have him in 5 of my 6 leagues. Let me just say that right up front. Yes, a monster game for Debo. Textbook Trent looked fantastic, looked sharp, looked like he can create space in much the same way that we had hoped or had gotten from Kendrick Bourne and in the past, perhaps way past from Trent. But I think that overall, it wasn't a fantastic showing. Certainly, you have the missing man in action, Brandon Aiyuk. That, to me, is the biggest question mark going forward. Will it be an immediate turnaround for Aiyuk if it really was just something where he got himself into a little bit of hot water? Or is it a lingering hamstring issue combined with the factors of a little bit of discipline needed there? It's unclear to me whether the light will just get turned on next game or whether it will be a slow progression there. But I definitely think that it's something to keep an eye out on.
What was your grade? You didn't actually drop your grade.
B+. I'm right along there with you. To me, it was A+ for Debo with the minor subtraction for the fumble there at the end. Mm-hmm. And then everyone else sort of, I'm not sure what we have there with everyone else at this point. All right, shifting gears, going over to the defense, starting with the D-line. Now, for me, if we had broken this up into outside and interior D-line, that would be two very distinct grades, and they would look very different in my book. But I'm putting it together, and together, to me, it was a C, a solid C. Average. I felt that we had great pressure on Goff. I thought that on the edges, we did a good job of putting pressure when he remained in the pocket. However, on any of the called bootlegs or where he escaped the pocket, I didn't think we did a fantastic job of hemming him in and setting the edge. And I fear that with mobile quarterbacks, that's going to be a significantly bigger issue for this D-line. And then up the middle, it was just atrocious. The run game up the middle gashed us considerably. And I don't think that we're talking about two of the league's best running backs in those that we faced for the Lions. So I do anticipate that unless scheme-wise we can draw something up to stem the bleeding there, I think that when we face some elite backs, we could be in for a long day when it comes to the run game and may have to rely a bit more on the offense to keep the ball out of the opposing offense's hands. How did you see the defensive line?
Yeah, I want to push back. I do think that Detroit's run game is a lot better than a lot of people think. Swift is a stud, and Williams, it was, a really great back, or not a great, but he was a solid back, backing
Very
up
solid.
Aaron Jones in Green Bay, and he showed it. And I think that that's their main weapon on offense is that running game. So we saw a lot of it. But I also think that the defensive line initially, when they were getting gashed by the run game, a lot of that had to do with that wide nine scheme that they were playing. And then once they got out of that, you saw that run game wasn't as effective as it was, earlier in the game. I also give the defensive line a C. And a lot of this has to, once again, do with expectation. The defensive line is the heart of our defense. If they're not playing well, the defense isn't going to look the same. Like, we don't have the studs on. I mean, we do have studs on all different levels, but they all play off of great defensive line play. And I think that section in the fourth quarter where Detroit was able to get back into the game could have easily be silenced if the defensive line dominated the way that they should have dominated, made Jared Goff make mistakes. They didn't get pressures in that 7-minute stretch till it came time to close out the game. And that lineup of Ebicom, Ford, and Bosa was out there. And then obviously they were able to shut it down. So for me, it is a C just because of consistency was not there. It was in the beginning, the run game was getting gashed. Middle of the game, they were solid. Probably would have graded out an A if that was just what we focused on. And then at the end of the game, they kind of let the rope loose again. So overall, I do have to give it a C just because we expect them to play a lot better and a full game, which we didn't see this game.
That's an interesting call out with the idea of expectations and factoring that into the grading process. And I think it's entirely fair when you consider the way in which this defense is built. It's built to get after the passer and make the secondary to everything else, right? Mm-hmm. The importance of the secondary is secondary. And right. That's intentional, right? The fact that we have Jason Verrett as our leading quarterback, quarterback, was intentional. And that was going in intentionally thin. Now, that plan has since blown up in our face after week 1. But that was how the team was intentionally built. And they had options at trying to build that cornerback room and didn't, and instead invested in solid defensive line pieces. And we shall see if the defensive line can provide enough pass rush to make that weak secondary, that thin secondary, look better than it actually is with regards to depth.
Only 3 sacks. And that's unacceptable for the type of investments that we've made in that defensive line and the expectations of that defensive line. So
it is high expectations. In fairness, that Lions offensive line may be stouter than we gave them credit for. I really was impressed with what I saw out there on the field, especially from Penei Sewell after hearing he had struggled so much at right tackle to see the way that he handled Bosa was very solid indeed. Yeah, it looks like there's a bit of agreement with us, ranging on pass rush as an A. Swan Song calling out there. I would agree. When you're talking about the pass rush, they didn't necessarily get home for those sacks. 3 sacks against Detroit, potentially not what you're looking for. But I did think that they created pressure. I thought that they were in his face. But when it came to everything else, getting dominated against the run, it was a little bit rough. All right, moving on to the linebackers. Certainly they play some role in defending the run there. How did you feel they graded out for the day?
Yeah, I mean, Fred Warner was kind of quiet. Greenlaw had, a couple of plays here and there. Azeez Al-Shaair really showed out, but overall, I'd give them a C as well. I think that the linebacking core didn't really separate themselves, and they missed. I mean, that running game initially, the reason why they play the wide nine scheme is for the linebackers to be able to plug those holes and make those reads, and clearly they didn't, which is why they were running all over us in the beginning of the first quarter. I think the tackling could have been a little bit better on that level. Obviously, Azeez had some, really nice tackles, one against Swift in the backfield on a screen, and then one against Hawkinson, which, jarred the ball out to stop that run as well. But I expect more out of these linebackers. I expect them to dominate. I expect Fred Warner to be all over the place. He didn't seem as mobile. It seemed like he was a little bit late on some reads. Drake Greenlaw obviously, got an injury late in the game. Overall, it's just an average game to me. I expect them to be playing a lot better. So an average game means a C in my books.
I think that that's a fair evaluation. I actually had them a bit higher here. I had them at a solid B. I thought that primarily what we saw in getting gashed in the run game had much more to do with the interior defensive line than it did the backers. And I was quite pleased with the big play Dre coming through with the pick 6. I had to bump it up for that. I thought Fred, who is a beast, was consistent out there on the field, although we did not call his name a hell of a lot. And then Azeez Al-Shaair coming through and really looking solid after Dre had to step out of the game with that tweaked groin. To me, it was a very solid day from them with a spectacular pick 6 from big play Dre. Not so great against the run. To me, that evened out into that B category. All right, defensive backs. I had to go C+ here, but maybe I'm being too hard because when I looked it up, they did hold the Lions to 6 yards per attempt, but I thought that it was very inconsistent. I thought that the loss of Verrett was huge and then quickly snowballed, and I thought that we had some costly mistakes in facing subpar competition. The Detroit Lions, when it comes to their receiving core, should have been easy fodder for our defensive backs. And I felt like we were unable to really stem the tides of the short passing game. Perhaps that was intentional, trying to keep everything in front of us, but it didn't feel like a spectacular game for me.
Yeah, so once again, I think just like most of the defensive grades, you have to kind of look at portions of the game, right? So most of the game, I think the cornerbacks actually did a pretty solid job for up until that 7-minute stretch in the fourth quarter. And I have a hard time. I've been asking a lot of people as far as, because the defense definitely changed as far as scheme when Verrett went down. It seemed like they stopped playing that man-to-man and they started playing more zone, or I don't know if it was like, it wasn't full prevent, but it seemed like more of like a zone or a soft zone, which obviously you're going to get gashed for that type of defense. So I don't know if you could just put it on the corners or if that was just more of a scheme thing. I thought obviously Lenore had an amazing game when you break down his numbers. K'Wan Williams had an amazing game when you break down his numbers. Verrett had the one mistake that led to a touchdown. So I would give them a B- as far as the overall grade, just because I think that whatever issues that you did see were more based off of design versus what they were actually doing. I didn't really see these guys get beat one-on-one too often. It seemed like more of, hey, We're going to play this soft zone, keep everything in front of you. And then obviously that's when you started seeing Detroit kind of move the ball down the field. I don't know if you could really put that on the corners as much as just the scheme.
That's fair. And certainly that was the game plan for Detroit with the short passes. And it did appear to be a type of zone, not prevent, but close to it there at the end, and a snowball effect. And momentum is a funny thing. And I have a sort of a surprise question for you on that to get your opinion later. But I tend to think that you're right in the fact that I'm being a little bit too hard on the defensive backs, that what they were asked to do, they were very good within the scheme that they were asked to play. All right, that puts us on our last grade here, special teams. Obviously, we had a missed field goal. We had the botched onside kick by George Kittle. But I thought a lot of solid punts by Wisnowski. Yeah. And so I'm going to go ahead and put this as a C. I'm tempted to go down to the C- because of that onside kick. That was really painful and really relevant. That was a key moment within the game. But I think when you look at it overall, as long as I'm not overreacting to that one instance, I thought it was solid, not spectacular.
Yeah, I think a C is a fair grade as well. You know, nothing special in the return game. Missed field goal by, Gold. I really think that, and then obviously the onside, blunder with Kittle. I'm a little bit worried about our kick game, to be honest. I think that we're kind of limited with Gold. He has pretty much only a range of 40 yards and below. And I think that kind of makes it where, that's an extra 10 yards that you have to gain at the end of a game or in a 2-minute drive to be able to put him in position. And, especially when we get into these games where the competition is a lot tighter, a field goal could be the difference between a victory and a non-victory. We just saw it in the Monday Night Football game, right? Between the Raiders and Baltimore. And so not having a kicker that's consistent at 50 yards and, those 55-yarders, those longer field goals, I think can be something that hurts us in some of these close games because, like I said, for the offense, that means they have to gain an extra 10, 15 yards where maybe another team that has a kicker that's more confident at those doesn't have to gain those yards. So I'm a little bit, uneasy about Gold. I think he's obviously been a great kicker his whole career. I just think we're getting, the tail end of him versus, the best of him.
Certainly he is at the tail end of his career, and I'm a little bit higher on Robbie Gould, but it's a fair critique that certainly from distance is the toughest range for Robbie Gould. He has struggled there. I would put it a little bit higher. I feel confident as long as we're at 45 yards or in. But to your point, there are a lot of critical kicks within the NFL that come in that 45-yard plus range, especially at the end of games. And we are paying Robbie Gould as if he is an elite kicker. And therefore, it is fair to expect from him that he hits those kicks. And certainly he is no Justin Tucker at this point in his career. And potentially it's just not fair to ask that of him given where he is at this point in his career. Mm-hmm. So potentially that was just our front office investing a little bit in a kicker who's on the decline, and rightfully so. All right. So that takes us through all of our grades from the Lions. Now take the Lions and throw them out of here, right? That's it. Right. We're moving on from the Lions. Now, who was your standout player of the week for the 49ers? Who really shocked you out there on the field?
It's got to be Elijah Mitchell, man. Just because, obviously Debo had a huge game as well. But for me, it's Mitchell because of the circumstances he came in and how important that run game is to our offense. And that there wasn't even a drop off. To me, he was definitely the standout player for me. If we didn't have his performance, I don't know if that's a win for us. I think that if that running game all of a sudden stalls when Mostert goes down after just 2 plays, it's a totally different game. So Mitchell going out there and having, I think it was the best game for a 49er rookie running back in their first appearance ever. You got to give it to Elijah Mitchell.
It was not only for the 49ers, but I heard a statistic around where he was drafted coming in as a 6th round rookie and his very first game breaking 100 yards. That also was setting an NFL record. So a fantastic game from Mitchell. Josh Mangold, what's up, Josh, is on board with you. My guy, Mitchell, on fire. Yes, I thought that might be your answer, and I had him as 1A, so I'm switching to 1B, which is pretty easy to do. I'm with Swan Song here. D Ford shocked me. Jason Ellis is on there as well. Ford. Yeah, D Ford, just to see him back, just to see D Ford on the field is a fantastic thing for the 49ers. I thought for sure that we had seen the last of D Ford in a 49ers uniform in the regular season. I thought that he would practice, and it's crazy. It was D Ford who caused that pick 6 that blew this game wide open, right? Yes. He was in Goff's face when Goff made that errant throw. That was fantastic pressure, a power move to push his blocker back into Goff. Great to see when you're talking about a guy with back issues, to see him be able to power through an offensive lineman, and then to come in shortly after that and record a sack. D Ford's first sack. To be able to tweet out, D Ford has gotten a sack and not be talking about 2019. Like, that just to me was fantastic. One of those stories that you just feel good about. And that to me is a super big positive. And I'm walking away from it with a big smile, even though on the whole, I wasn't completely thrilled with the defense. Seeing Ford out there overshadows some of the other things that happened within the game that had me feeling a little bit down.
Yeah. And I mean, he definitely had the most efficient game because he only played 30 snaps to get, 1 sack, to get 1 play that led to an interception. And then he was on the field for that last play that sealed the game, basically, to shut down Detroit to give us back the ball at the end of the game. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if he could keep ramping him up and keep him healthy throughout the season so that he's healthy going into the playoffs, which I think we both expect the 49ers to be in this year, that's a wild card that we didn't expect. So that's all house money at that point.
Not at all. That lineup where you have Ebukam and Ford and Bosa rushing the passer with Armstead in there as defensive tackle. I mean, that's a hell of a turbo package. That is just ridiculous. I like to call out here, maybe get a C on Ford's chest. I wonder if that didn't happen because there was a fear that he wasn't going to make it through. And it's still early, but God, it was good to see him out there. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. All right. So if that's our biggest positive, let's flip this thing around and talk about what was the biggest disappointment from the game.
I mean, obviously the injuries could be one, but
sure.
I'm going to say the defensive line. I just expected them to dominate in a way that I didn't see. When the 53-man roster was announced, not one defensive lineman was cut. Everybody made the team. And that means that we lost some cornerback depth. That means that we lost a guy like Gallman. That means that we lost some players on the team that, could have been productive players that didn't make it because we kept 11 defensive linemen. And I just don't think that we saw that type of game as far as a dominant defensive line game. So for me, that was the biggest disappointment. I wanted to see, we've seen Goff as a Ram, and I don't think we've ever settled for 3 sacks against him with the Rams. Like, he's not a mobile guy. We should have gotten to him a lot more. The run game, there was, Swift had a huge game. Williams had a huge game or solid game. So, I mean, I put that on the defensive line. I expect them to be a lot better. Maybe it's a product of expectation, but when we invest as much as we did, players are not on this team because you guys made the team because we're building through the defensive line. You got to be better.
Yeah, those are fair expectations. Those are expectations based upon the amount that the 49ers invest into their defensive line. And so, of course, we expect them to be dominant. And I'm right there with you. I thought it was the run defense, specifically the interior D-line. I thought that the over pursuit along the entirety of the D-line was obvious and opened up enormous gaps that you could drive a Mack truck through. And I do think that that's cause for concern for games when we come up against elite backs in the future. Certainly something that you would hope we could have made some in-game adjustments for, and didn't appear that we did. So that's another thing I'm looking for going forward, is a bit more of the in-game adjustments in order to stem the flow for whatever is hitting us in the mouth while we're on defense. And it's a real question because weeks 3 and 4, we're looking at going up against Aaron Jones and Chris Carson. And neither one of those guys are scrubs, right? They are both going to be leading backs within the league. To your point, I think it is fair that DeAndre Swift is a better back than I'm giving him credit for. I probably am still holding on to the idea of whether or not he's going to make it through the entirety of a season, as opposed to actual talent on the field. And if you look at it that way, perhaps the run game wasn't as atrocious as you may think. And the overzealousness by the line to get to the quarterback may have stemmed from that idea that they were going against Goff and they expected to get him to the ground 6 or 7 times, as opposed to those 3 sacks. All right, this next question is the surpriser, and this is just a quick one that I wanted to get your take on.
Sure.
But when it comes to the defensive collapse, what did you see as the cause for that? Was the defensive collapse more of a result of a snowball effect, just momentum change, or is it cause for concern going forward?
So I think there definitely was a letdown when you saw Verrett. And it's not that Verrett got injured. It was just the emotion you saw on his face, and you knew that he was done for the season. And I'm sure the team understands the position that Verrett's in. He bet on himself this year. He could have gotten a long-term deal with other teams, or even maybe the 49ers would have given him a long-term deal with maybe less money per year. But he said, no, I'm going to bet on myself. I'm going to sign a 1-year deal. And he obviously expected to be healthy and ball out and be able to set himself up to make a good contract in his next contract. Having a season-ending injury in the first game of that season, you just saw it on his face. So these guys are a family. I could only imagine just seeing one of your brothers just there crying and just realizing you understand, oh my God, this guy is done for the season, and all the repercussions of that. There's definitely a letdown there. And then I think the second part of it was the scheme change. I think that D'Amico Ryans, for whatever reason, was maybe feeling the same thing. Was just like, all right, we have this lead. Let's play like we have a lead versus let's just play football. And I think that playing like we had a lead, bit the 49ers in the butt a little bit. And then obviously the snowball effect once Kittle, doesn't get the onside kick and gives him another opportunity. So it was just kind of like everything that could go wrong was going right. Murphy's Law, right? So
Murphy's Law.
I think it was more of that combination of decision-making plus the injury. I don't think it's something that we have to worry about long-term, Rob, because I think when Mosley comes back, so we are going to be a little bit thin till Mosley comes back, but a defensive secondary with Mosley and Lenoir, I think is still very competitive. And so I still think we could be good just because we all knew that the secondary, even with Verrett, was never our strength. It was always the defensive line. Lenoir's been playing lights out. Mosley, we know, could play ball as well. So I think those two as our corners. Obviously, we're losing a little bit because Verrett is better than both of those, but I still think we're having very competent cornerback play, which is going to be enough to keep us competitive in all these games, no matter who we play.
You've just made me a very happy man because I was a little down. And even though I was feeling that it was more of a momentum shift and much more of a snowball effect and a change in scheme, it still had me a little nervous. I'm not going to lie. But I think you have just talked me back off the ledge, at least for one more game.
Mr.
And I appreciate
Positivity.
that.
That's what I'm here for, man.
So going from one devastating loss, and I think you're right that emotional shift of seeing Verrett out there, a grown man that is obviously one of the tougher guys on the team, when you look at what he has fought back from in his career, when you see him in tears on the field, it's hard not to let that affect you as one of his teammates. And so that takes us into the next topic, and that is losing Mostert. And I really put this topic on here mainly because I wanted to take a moment to speak to the 49er faithful and just acknowledge the fact that Mostert's wife actually had to come out on Instagram and talk about people messaging her, DMing her, and saying shitty things, really shitty things about Mostert and about the injury. And to me, that's just unacceptable. And if there's anyone watching who knows anyone who's that type of person on the internet, you got to talk to them. You got to let them know that they're probably not that type of person to people when they meet them face to face. And these are still real people on the other side of the internet. These are still real people with real feelings. These are family members. This is Mostert's wife, for goodness sake. Like that, it hits me somewhere where I have to say something. And I realize that I'm probably talking to no one here because no one who would say anything like that to Mostert would be watching this show. But I feel that those of us who believe wholeheartedly in being good to other human beings and not making someone else's day worse, because life is already hard enough, and you should know that by how hard your own life is. To me, it's irresponsible of me not to take a moment and say something, and it's up to those of us who do care to do the right thing and make the internet a little bit of a better place. I'll get off my soapbox there. No, I think it's a big loss.
I'm sorry. Just to keep going, we did the same thing on my stream this morning with Silverado Kev. You know, it probably isn't 49er fans that are saying that. I think fantasy football has made people go crazy. And obviously it seems like it's more about that, but we do have to understand, even though we cheer for these guys, sometimes we treat these guys like they're just these football players, like we're playing a video game. These are actual human beings. Mostert also was in a contract year. Him making the decision to have season-ending injury not only affects his health, not only affects the team, but it affects his future and how he's going to take care of his family moving forward as well. So Verrett, same thing. So we have to understand, take out the fandom, take out the emotion, see these guys as human beings that are going through real life decisions. And that probably was one of the hardest career decisions he had to make, was to go under the knife and have season-ending surgery in a contract year, knowing that it probably is going to affect whether or not he even gets a contract next year. Who knows if somebody's going to sign an aging running back coming off of season-ending knee surgery. You know what I mean? So that's a huge deal. So for people to be feeling like it affected them more than it's affecting him, like my fantasy team is messed up, dude, get some perspective in life.
Get some perspective. That's a great way to phrase it. Jason here says, if people get that way over fantasy football, they don't need to play it. Damn. That's how I feel. These are human beings. Fantasy football is a freaking game. And I play it and I love it. I'm in 6 leagues. But at no point do I think it's okay to insult a human being who's putting his body on the line for this sport. Like, it's just atrocious to me. The internet can be a wonderful place for what it does for this world, and it can be an awful place. And that's just, to me, an example of where it's awful. And I'll close it on a positive note in that I do feel that we have the running back room that has insulated us from this loss. From the 49ers perspective, it is tragic to have lost Mostert. From a human perspective, I am absolutely devastated by that. I was a big Mostert fan. I thought he could do a great deal for this team. I thought for the first half of the year, he was going to be dominant until Sermon came in and absorbed more of those carries down the stretch. And I think that it is a loss we will feel, but I do believe we were well insulated. And therefore, if we're going to take a loss like that, it is in some ways fortunate for the team that they invested so heavily behind him, and that we do have someone like Bobby Turner who can find those gems and allow us to draft someone in the 6th round who could come in and potentially hold up what Mostert was going to be able to bring to the game. So there is some solace in that.
Jeff Wilson should be coming back near the end of the season. So that's just going to bolster up. He'll have fresh legs to be able to come back. Obviously, we don't expect him to be, he's coming off of an injury, but still, whatever he could bring can help take the ball out of maybe some heavy legs with Trey Sermon and Elijah Mitchell and help bring that rotation, all the way around, just like 2019 with 3 studs at running back.
Yeah, and good luck to those of you in the fantasy world determining which of those running backs is going to win on any given Sunday. It will be week to week. And so I'm going to skip past the Brandon Aiyuk topic and go right into the fantasy aspect of it. And we can touch on Brandon a little bit here when we talk about the wide receivers. I feel as though we covered the idea that he probably was held back a bit because of the disciplinary issues, and that leads into it. There certainly is the lingering issue, but let's just talk about it from a fantasy aspect. The first thing I want to ask you here is, do you see any value, standalone value, in Trey Lance at this point? Or do you think it's a hold him until and if he takes over that starting spot for real fantasy value?
Yeah, so just shameless plug also, Rob, after this show at 5:30 on my channel, I actually do every Wednesday night, a fantasy football show with my friend Casey, who is just like a computer when it comes to fantasy knowledge. So just if any of you guys are into that, please go to my channel after this show if you're interested. But
little 5:30 plug, 5:30 on Sunil's channel, fantasy football. I will be tuning in because I have 6 lineups that I need to set.
That's awesome. So it depends on the type of league you're in, right? If you're in a dynasty league, clearly you keep him, right? Because he's gonna be a starter in next year, hopefully. Maybe 2 years, depending on how Jimmy does this year, right? So you definitely want to keep him. Now, in a redraft league, which you just have him this year, I don't know if there's that much value at this point. I think you could get a better option for you that's going to play more consistently out of some of these other quarterbacks. Like even a quarterback like Kirk Cousins in like these standard leagues got like 22 points for you. So I think that Jimmy's playing well enough to where he's not going to be pulled out because of bad football. He's only going to be pulled out because of injury. So to me, I don't think Trey Lance is going to get enough run for him to take up a spot on your team in a redraft league.
I think that's fair. And I would also say it probably depends on your depth, in my opinion. I'm with Josh in that if you need to make some moves at this time, you're probably cutting Lance because he's not going to make any immediate jumps in the next couple of weeks. I think it is fair to assume that you're looking for him to get more and more snaps. I thought I saw something. Yeah, here we go, where we're talking about, I think Lance will start to get more and more reps every week. I agree with that, but I still think he's not going to be fantasy relevant for another month or so. Let's see this next one. Lance is a hold. So that's where I am. If you have a deep team where you've got some scrubs at the end of the bench and you have a quarterback that has a bye later in the year, I'm keeping Lance because I believe in him for second half of the season. If Jimmy gets hurt, he's an automatic start. So to me right now, he's a potential hold. All right.
It also depends on who your starting quarterback is. Because if your starting quarterback is going to outperform Lance, then once again, maybe it's better off grabbing a receiver, grabbing a running back if that's where more of your weaknesses are. Like if I have Patrick Mahomes, what do I care if Trey Lance is on my team, right? So yeah, so it kind of depends on what your situation is. I think just as of now, you could probably re-pick him up in a few weeks. I don't think anybody's picking him up right away. So, just keep an eye on him. But like I said, I think Jimmy's looks great, looks healthy. Seems like he's going to be playing most of these games. So
it definitely does at this point in time. When we're looking at running back, the most convoluted position in any Shanahan offense, but certainly at the injury that we saw and the fact that Trey Sermon wasn't actually active week one got a little wonky because in a lot of my drafts, Sermon was going above Mostert because people saw the potential of Sermon and what he might bring down the stretch, in particular fantasy playoffs. How do you see the running back situation shaking out? And would you stash Jeff Wilson?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably not stash Jeff Wilson because I find it hard he's going to get that much run with the way Mitchell's playing and how I envision Sermon playing. Now, if Sermon comes out and he's not as good as we expect him to be, maybe then I pick up Jeff Wilson because definitely they need a goal line back. It doesn't look like Mitchell is as effective at goal line and, the short yardage back. But I think right now, Elijah Mitchell is probably gone from most leagues at this point after his week 1 performance. I think he was the most picked up guy on the waiver wire.
Yeah, he went for $52 in my FAAB of one fantasy league. I put in a bid at 42 and I was like, I'm overpaying for him. And then someone of their $100 of free agent acquisition budget, they did 52 of 100.
Wow.
Crazy.
Yeah. So, and I do think that Shanahan likes Mitchell a little bit more than Sermon at this point. And it seems like he's going to get a bulk of the carries. I mean, Hasty was there and he didn't really get that many carries compared to Mitchell. I was actually surprised. I thought that they would spread the ball a little bit more, but most of the carries went to Mitchell. So I expect him to still get a lot of play. I think he will out carry even Sermon just because of the production that he has. But like you said, that's a week to week type of thing. Shanahan,
it really is.
Knows
from one game plan to the next.
Yeah, well, Shanahan is known for just going with whoever the hot hand is. So if Sermon's having a big game, he's going to get the ball. Mitchell was having a big game. They kept giving the ball to Mitchell. So whomever is hot. So it's kind of like hit or miss. I would probably, if they're playing early game and you want to start them, make sure you put them in your actual running back position and not the flex position, so that if you don't get the production out of them, you could, move somebody back in there in the flex to kind of save the day.
Right. That's key. That is key. Flexibility in the flex spot.
Yeah.
Josh Mangold, I respect the surge of putting all $200 in on it. I mean, I should have, because I had Mostert in that. The only one league I had Mostert in was that league, and therefore I should have. And I have Sermon, so I could have had the entire backfield. To me, for the running back situation, it stays the same as I had before, but now I've replaced Now I have replaced Mostert with Mitchell. So I believe Mitchell is the guy to have for the first half of the season and Sermon for the back half of the season. So I'm buying low on Sermon right now, because you're going to have a bunch of people, in particular, if he doesn't get a lot of touches this week, that are going to want to bail on Sermon. Take advantage of that if you have a couple of lower spots on your roster where you can stash him for the second half of the season. All right, moving right along, receivers. Is Debo a bona fide stud?
Absolutely. I mean, the chemistry with him and Jimmy G seems to be his favorite receiver. I mean, he was only targeting him, right, throughout the whole game. Debo seems healthy. His ball skills seem better. His adjustment to that underthrown ball. There's been a debate. Was it underthrown? Was it was he aiming for that part? But anyways, right. Debo made a play on the ball to be able to make that catch.
Yes, he did.
He still has he's still part of the Yak Bros, and showing that. And we haven't even seen him in the jet sweep game as much as we expect. He had a couple in that game, but I still think there's another level of this offense that Debo's a part of, that, like you said, because it was Detroit, I don't think Shanahan even showed. So even though he might not continue to get 180 yards as far as passing game, like that might go down, but you still have him as the rushing attack. You still have him, to be able to get touchdowns in the red zone, things like that. So I'm absolutely 100%. There's no way he's on the waiver wire. He was drafted.
No way.
Sure. But he is somebody that I am starting at receiver, depending on, who my other receivers are as well, obviously.
Yeah, this one I saw coming. I saw Debo as the greatest value in that 100 to 120 pick range. I was floored that he was going there because of the yards from scrimmage aspect. that he may just be a 1,000-yard receiver or slightly below that. But when you factor in the yards he's going to get from scrimmage in the rush game, to me, it's that 12 to 1,400 yards from scrimmage range for Debo. And that's ridiculous value for where he was going. I managed to scoop him up in 5 of 6 leagues, and he is a starter for me on a weekly basis until he proves otherwise. I have some doubts about Brandon Aiyuk as far as a fantasy perspective, whether you can count on him week to week. And so for me, within the receiving game, for the wide receivers specifically, the only one that's consistent for me is Debo. Now, when you talk about pass catchers and you go into tight end, Kittle is a week-to-week starter, no question about it. But when you look at where he was drafted in fantasy football drafts and the lack of touchdowns he has historically produced, and it would seem is going to be unable to produce this year as well, if we're judging by one game, which would be a little irresponsible of us.
Right.
But it does strike me that we haven't found the key to unlocking him in the red zone. And if we don't, to me, the value for Kittle just wasn't there to draft him. Obviously, if you have him, though, you're starting him every week. A bigger question mark to me is the defense. That makes for a little bit more of an interesting dialogue. So when you look at the defense, because I was projecting potentially a top 5 defense, what do you see? Is this something that you're holding on to the 49ers defense in fantasy, or are you skeptical now?
No, I'm still holding on, because if you look at the pick 6, none of that had anything to do with the DBs, right? It had everything to do with the defensive line and the linebackers. And I think that most of these interceptions and turnovers are going to be stemmed from pressure from the defensive line and opportunistic play from the DBs, the safeties, and the linebackers. So nobody on the defensive line, obviously Kinlaw, but as far as pass rushing, nobody on the defensive line is injured. Everybody's still healthy. We're still completely intact there. So until there's like a huge loss in the defensive line, knock on wood, that we won't see at all this season. If Bosa's there, Ford's there, Ebicom's there, Armstead's there, I still think that this is a dominant defense, because once again, that is what makes our defense dominant. It's not our safeties. It's not our cornerbacks. It's not even though we have all pro Fred, it's not even our linebackers. It's the defensive line. So as long as that defensive line is intact, our defense is just where it needs to be.
That makes me feel a little bit better. I think that's where I am. I'm still emotionally attached to what happened on Sunday and the scare that really shook me a bit toward the end of it. Admittedly, while I was watching the game, I never thought it was in question. I never thought we were going to lose it, but it did give me trepidation about how good this defense really is. But you're making a solid point there, which is one I have said continually, which is that we build through the defensive line. And until there is something amiss with the defensive line, if we continue to see struggles there, if we can't stop the run game, if Kinlaw comes back and that doesn't improve our run defense, maybe I'll shift my opinion. But I think we still have the potential to be a dominant defense. And I thought that the value for the 49ers in drafting their defense was phenomenal. Therefore, I have them in several leagues, and all of my friends call me a homer for doing so, and probably rightfully
which
so.
Which you are.
Indeed. 100%. All right. Well, that takes us into the most important topic for the day, where we'll take a couple of minutes here and talk about our upcoming game here.
Yeah.
So how you feeling about these week 2 predictions? What do you expect out of week 2, San Francisco 49ers versus the Philadelphia Eagles?
So I expect a very close game. I think that a lot of the faithful, when I'm looking on Twitter, are underestimating how good the trenches are for the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yes.
They we probably don't follow, most 49er fans probably don't follow the Eagles. My best friend is actually a hardcore Eagles fan. So I get a lot of we talk about our teams all the time. The Eagles were exactly like the 49ers last season, where they were decimated by injuries, especially along the offensive line. They have Lane Johnson, who is a stud on their offensive line, and then another guy that's named Brandon something. I always forget his last name. They just re-upped their left tackle, but their offensive line is intact, and they are extremely good. Their defensive line is probably one of the most underrated defensive lines in the game. So our offensive line play against Detroit, we talked about was very, very good. They are going to be challenged in this game. So they are going to have to play just as good, if not better, and not in any type of mistake is going to be maximized because they are playing people that are really good in the trenches. So for me, my expectations are whomever wins the trenches, right? So whomever's defensive line dominates, whomever's offensive line dominates, wins the game. And that's really what it's going to boil down to. Obviously, for the defense, there's another layer because Jalen Hurts is a mobile quarterback. So that has always been the Achilles heels for the 49ers defense.
Yes.
However, we did bring in a guy named Samson Ebukam exactly for this situation, right? We know we play mobile quarterbacks in Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson 4 games out of the season. Now we got Jalen Hurts added to the list for this season. Ebukam, this is the game for you to prove to the 49er faithful why we brought you in. This is your time to shine. And I guarantee you, if you have a big game, Ebukam, because I know you watch this show, if you have a big game, your jersey will be flying off the racks in San Francisco. So please, please, please prove your worth because the Eagles look good. Now, it was against the Atlanta Falcons, whose defense is nothing to be scared of. However, they are an NFL team, and, you know, the team looked really, really good. So I expect a very close game. However, I am going to say that the 49ers edge it out just because I believe we could put up enough points to be able to win this game.
Nice. What do you have as the final score prediction if you're calling it off the cuff?
Probably something like a field goal game, 24-21. So come on, Gold. Come on, Gold.
I'm with you. And in the comments, everybody's saying this is going to be tight. And I agree with Swan here when talking about the idea of Philly excelled with these short passes. And what Hurts was doing is very repeatable against the 49ers. I love your prediction around Samson Ebukam. I want to talk to Samson. I want to talk to Samson. And I would love to see him dominate and hold Hurts from just ripping us to shreds because we have historically struggled against those mobile quarterbacks. When I looked at the game and rewatched it, Atlanta against the Eagles, I mean, I was pleasantly surprised by the way in which Atlanta was able to move the ball against Philly early. Atlanta sure as hell shot themselves in the foot several times early in that game. They had a chance to keep that thing really close throughout the entirety of the first half, and it felt significantly more on them. The fact that Philly did look good, but more so that Atlanta looked discombobulated, that it was week 1 rust throughout that first half and that they could have stayed in it. I thought that game was a lot closer than it actually showed on the final score. Yeah. And when I look at Philly's defensive front, though, that is where I wonder if we're going to have as good of a performance from our offensive line in week 2 as we did with week 1. Barnett was blowing up the right side of Atlanta's line, and it'll be interesting to see whether Mike McGlinchey is going to be able to hold up in pass protection against that sort of a rush, because he came out of week 1 looking good. And I certainly anticipate that when it comes to running the ball, we will continue to be dominant. But I wonder if we'll be able to keep Jimmy's uniform clean on Sunday. That's a ferocious defensive front from Philly. I thought they did a great job against Atlanta. You have a similarly immobile quarterback in Matt Ryan when you're talking about Jimmy Garoppolo. So you have to wonder if there are some similarities there. I think that it's going to be dependent upon the 49ers run game to be dominant, to continue holding the ball, and to make sure that we can run up the score on our end, because I do see a bit of a shootout. I think it'll be a mid-grade shootout here. Not going to be one of those high-flying, high-scoring games, but I think that both offenses will show the ability to move the ball and put up points. And I think that for the 49ers, it's going to be predicated upon the run game having significant success. For the Eagles, I anticipate that it will be the dreaded hybrid mobile quarterback that really hurts us, that it will be Jalen Hurts escaping the pressure in the pocket, rolling out, whether planned rollout or not, and then hitting Devontae Smith down the field. I have a bad feeling that Smith is going to shred us a bit in the secondary when he gets loose. If we are unable to hit Hurts and to get Hurts on the ground early and often, I do think that we will see him beat us over the top and then hit us underneath with that short passing game as well. And the occasional dump off to Miles Sanders, who is definitely dangerous in space when you can get him the ball. So if they can get the ball to Miles Sanders, Devontae Smith, Jalen Reagor right behind our defensive line as they are being overly aggressive, and if we don't hold up our positions there, I think that you have a recipe for success for the Eagles. And therefore, to me, it's all about being able to match that pound for pound. I've got the final score. Niners taking this one 34-31. I think it's a close one, and I think we're counting on Robbie Gould to pull us through in the end here.
Man, and I was already, that's what scares me, is that we're putting it in the special teams' hands, which, isn't the same special teams from a few years ago. Well, is the same special teams, which is a problem because they're 2 years older.
Yeah. It's crazy. In answering this for RMOB Nation, how can we contain Jalen Reagor and Devontae Smith? I think that the only way you contain them is through the pass rush. This is the way the 49ers built their defense. The line first. It's getting after the quarterback. And I think the only way we assure ourselves to be able to get out of this thing with a victory is if we can bring Hurts down and sack him, make it uncomfortable for him, not give him the time to get it down the field to Devontae Smith and Jalen Reagor.
The other option is obviously if Mosley comes back, which I think is the start, like the player that I'm really looking at on the injury thing to see, like, is he going to play? Look, the one thing, Reagor and Devontae Smith are really good running backs. Both of them are slender. Both of them are not big receivers. So if Lenore and Mosley can play physical with these guys, that might be another way to kind of keep them from having the type of games that they want. We have really good safeties that can help, in coverage if we need to. So maybe playing that press man coverage, being real aggressive with them at the line, beating them up so that later on in the game, these receivers just don't have the same type of speed that they had earlier in the game, is another way that we might be able to help slow down those two receivers. So I think there's a couple of options.
Sunil, that's a fantastic point. I have it in my own notes, the idea of redirecting them at the line of scrimmage. I think you do have to play press. I think you do have to get your hands on them. I think that is a critical component. And our safeties have to be able to lay the wood. When they do make those catches downfield, you got to be able to punch them in the mouth and really be physical, right? That has to be something that you put into their mindset when they're going over the top. I think that in the comments, people are feeling the Niners victory here as well. Everybody's predicting a close one. I think it's going to be a fantastic game on Sunday. I'm looking forward to it, man. Are you pumped?
I'm pumped, and especially with the way the NFC West is playing, these are the type of games that you can't lose, because these are the type of games that can really set you apart. And at the end of the season, we're going to be looking back, and these are the teams that let go of the rope on the games that they should win are going to be the ones that are kicking themselves at the end of the season. That could have been the difference between a bye and maybe, having to play, maybe not even making the playoffs.
Maybe not even making it. That's a fact. I tell you what, these teams are going to be within a couple of games of each other at the end of the season. And it is these games that you have to put away if you're going to be that dominant team, if you're thinking that you're going to get home field advantage in the playoffs. If you think you're going to make the playoffs, you have to win this Sunday. No question about it. So Real Sunil, you have been a fantastic guest here today. We greatly appreciate you stopping by, and we look forward to the next time you're able to join us. And until then, go Niners.
Go Niners.